Okay, it looks like we have a great number of folks that have signed on, so we'll go ahead and get going this evening. I am Molly Jones, the Executive Director of Sustainable Princeton. We are so delighted that we have a strong group audience joining us this evening for this definitely important topic. As we get going this evening, we really want to reinforce that this is meant to be a community discussion. It's really an opportunity to come together and hear the viewpoints of so very many individuals. So we hope that you can approach this evening's discussion with an open mind and really hear the thoughts and views of others, particularly as our country is coming through a time of such great divide. We feel that it is very important to approach these somewhat challenging topics and hear from our fellow neighbors. So with all of that being said, I am going to quickly switch over our introduction, or my introduction, to Spanish and welcome our Spanish-speaking residents, and then with this same introduction. So, bienvenidos a ustedes. Yo soy la directora de Sustainable Princeton, una non-profit aquí en el pueblo de Princeton que trabaja en el ambiente. Nosotros estamos tan agradecidos que ustedes están aquí con nosotros. Nosotros queremos escuchar sus voces. Hay muchos problemas en nuestro pueblo y estamos aquí para escuchar de ustedes. Entonces, bienvenidos. Okay, with that, we're going to switch to the next slide, please. So if you are, and I'm going to say this in Spanish as well, if you are interested in hearing the program tonight, there is a button on the lower panel. It looks like this. You click on that and can select Spanish. Si quieren escuchar la presentación en español, que toca el botón que se dice interpretación y se va a ver que hay una palabra de Spanish que lo toca y así se puede escucharlo en español. Okay, next slide, please. We do want to, as we get going this evening, we do want to express thanks to our partner, the Princeton Public Library. Kim Dorman, who is joining us this evening, is a staff member of the library and always continues to be such a wonderful, collaborative and supportive partner. We are very grateful. Then we also want to thank Partners for Places. This is the funder of the grant that Sustainable Princeton and the town of Princeton, with our many, many partners on this project, has received in order to do this work. So next slide. So just a couple of things of housekeeping. We do definitely want to hear your thoughts and questions. If you want to click on the question button at the bottom of your screen, you can add your question. We also encourage you to add thumbs ups to the other people's questions, to the questions others have posed, so that we can know that it's a priority topic that we want to make sure that we can get to. We have a lot of participants on this webinar this evening, so just by adding your enthusiasm for the different questions, that'll assure we get to the points that interest the majority. Okay, so with that, we are going to kick off a small poll. So please bear with me. Let's see, I think the poll is coming. All right, so please, we're going to have, maybe we'll keep this up for 30 or 45 seconds. Please chime in and tell us, you'll see your personal answers to the 2 questions that are noted here. All right, it looks like we have about half of our audience who has responded. We'll wait a few more moments. Thank you so much. A couple of last individuals are chiming in. Okay, we'll go ahead and end the poll. Okay, as you can see this evening, about 60% of those who are in attendance are Princeton residents. We do have a number of landscapers that are working here in Princeton, so we are delighted to have them join us as well. And then we have a number of residents from other towns. This obviously, sustainable landscaping is not a topic that is only a concern here in Princeton, so we are delighted to have you as well. As we look down, we're discussing who manages their own property. It looks about 60% of you do, whereas about 30% use service, and then a few provide that service to residents, commercial businesses. And then there's a few folks on here who rent and so are not overseeing their own landscaping management. Okay, so with this, I'm going to hand this program over to our program director, Christine Symington.
Hello, and thank you everyone for joining. So I want to start by going over what the objectives are for tonight's meeting. The first thing we want to do is understand why we're working on this project. The next objective is we want to understand the work that's been done so far. The next thing we want to understand is, what do we mean by sustainable landscaping? That might mean many things to different people. Our other objectives are to understand the process that we'll follow as a community as we work towards more sustainable landscaping practices. And I want to share who the project partners are. As Molly mentioned, the town was a recipient of a Partners for Places grant to allow us to work together as a community on this particular topic. Project partners include from the municipality, a council representative, members from the Board of Health, member from the Civil Rights Commission, member from the Environmental Commission, and member of the Human Services Commission. Another project partner is Unidad Latina en Acción, New Jersey. They will be participating in a steering committee with all the project partners and helping us to make sure that the landscapers are involved with the project throughout. In particular, they're going to be assisting us with conducting workshops with the landscapers. We also will have someone from Rutgers School of Public Health sort of be our public health advisor throughout the process. Next is Quiet Princeton. Tony Lunn, who's on tonight's agenda, will be talking a little bit later. So I'll let him introduce himself and explain a little bit about Quiet Princeton. Next, Sustainable Princeton. We are the convener and the facilitator for the project. That's the role we play in bringing everyone together and doing a lot of the backbone work for the project. Next is LALDEF, the Latin American Legal and Defense and Education Fund. We'll be working with their Futuro students and involving them in the project as part of their service learning tasks. And also Maria Wega, who will also be speaking tonight. She's a Princeton resident and has been a longtime advocate for the Hispanic and Latina community. So while not everyone will be speaking tonight that's a project partner, they are all either attending or will be listening to what is discussed tonight and the questions that come up. So why are we here? Well, first, there is a negative impact on the health of landscaping workers from traditional landscaping practices. There is also a negative impact on the environment from traditional landscaping practices. The recognition of these impacts is not new. There's been a shift for some of our community members to work or attend school from home because of the pandemic, and this has brought these issues to the fore, issues such as noise pollution and the impact on quality of life. And the pandemic is exposing and worsening the disparities that exist in our community. And this is an opportunity for us as a community to come together to address these issues. Next slide. Another reason we're here is that there's a recognition in the environmental and sustainability community that not enough has been done to address inequities in our society. And that led us to the town having the ability to apply for and receive grant from Partners for Places, which specifically looks to fund projects that advance an equitable and sustainability project. You can click forward, Jenny. So they were specifically looking for projects that would serve people who were impacted by systems of oppression and injustice, economic disadvantage, and environmental harm, where those individuals are co-creators and leaders and partners in designing the solutions. And that the project would seek to address the systemic sorry, we're having a little bit of a delay here, that are committed to ensure that the partners are committed to addressing institutional and systemic racism and ensure equitable outcomes. So lawn care is a multifaceted issue. There are some residents that demand a perfect lawn. That is sort of the paradigm that many of us are used to. Some residents live on a budget, can only pay so much for lawn care. Some residents are fed up with noise. Some residents are concerned about air pollution. Some just want to enjoy their yard without much thought. And of course, there are landscapers. They're members of our community. They have families. They're business people. They're entrepreneurs. So as you can see, it's a multifaceted issue. Now, back in December, the Civil Rights Commission presented to the council a racial equity impact assessment to be used as a guiding document for community programs and policies. And so we've been looking very closely at this as a guiding tool as we go about this work. The thing that we've noted from that equity toolkit is number 2 on the first page here is, this toolkit is a means to solicit input on the municipality's programs and policies from community stakeholders. We believe it's essential to consult and get the perspective of impacted communities, particularly historically marginalized communities, in the development of programs and policies. So that's an example of a guiding principle that we want to follow throughout the work. Another example of some guiding principles of how we want to go about doing this work comes from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and their definition of equity objectives. They have 3 categories: procedural, distributional, and structural equity. Procedural equity is creating processes that are transparent, fair, and inclusive, and developing and implementing any program, plan, or policy. Ensure that all people are treated fairly and openly, and to increase the civic engagement opportunities of communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Distributional equity is one that fairly distributes resource benefits and burdens. Prioritize resources for communities that experience the greatest inequities, disproportionate impacts, and have the greatest unmet needs. And structural equity is to make a commitment to correct past harms and prevent future unintended consequences, as well as addressing the underlying structural and institutional systems that are root causes of social and racial inequities. Just want to take a moment to pause here. We're getting some feedback from folks that the Spanish translation is cutting off and can't be understood. If you'll bear with us a moment while we just try to figure out if we can address this technical issue.
So I'm trying to get in again.
Thank you, Christina.
Christina, can you please give us another check? We think that your speaking volume was very low and that was what the issue was. Now you sound very good, so maybe we can try it again.
Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you clearly now. Yes.
Great. Let's move on. Please let us know if it continues to be a
Much
problem.
better.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, so how does all this fit into the Princeton Climate Action Plan? From an emissions perspective, lawn maintenance equipment isn't a big part of our greenhouse gas footprint. Our best estimate is that it's about less than 1% of Princeton emissions. So that isn't a reason why we're not going to focus on this. It just means that there are other things we need to do in our community to address climate change in terms of emissions. Next slide. But we do contemplate the landscaping practices in the Climate Action Plan in the sense that if we adopt more sustainable practices, we'll be making our environment and human health, will be make our environment more resilient, as well as members of our community. So there are actions of the plan that are specific to this topic, which are one, to protect and expand connective corridors between habitats and open spaces and expanding no-mow and low maintenance areas. We also have an action to reduce emissions from public and private lawn maintenance equipment. And we have a resiliency action to advocate for the health and safety of outdoor workers during extreme weather events. Next slide. So what do we know so far? I'm going to go through the results of a survey that we have submitted to the landscaping community. We did some preliminary Zoom interviews. We went about trying to understand how many landscaping companies are doing business in Princeton by looking online and through word of mouth. We also looked to see what businesses were registered with the municipality. And we created a survey that we got results by calling landscapers, emailing them, and also sent a paper mailing out in both English and Spanish. I'm not going to go through all of the results of the survey, just some highlights. Next. So our best guess is there are about 69 different landscaping companies operating in Princeton. To date, we've had 21 complete the survey, which is about a third of local landscapers. We would appreciate if anyone on the call has a landscaper that hasn't already completed the survey. If they could, we have the URL here. If you could go back a slide, Molly, folks to see the URL. It's available in both English and Spanish. And you can email us at info@sustainableprinceton.org and we can send you the link. Next. So one of the questions we asked to understand the size of the companies is how many employees do you have? So for the folks that answered the survey, most of them have small crews, about 6 to 12 employees, 1 to 5 employees. 65% have 1 to 5 employees and about 20% have 6 to 12 employees. Next slide. We also asked how many pieces of equipment do you have? So there are a total of 134 leaf blowers and 123 mowers that were owned by the 21 businesses. We also asked how much they spend on gasoline in a given year. So the combined total is about $252,000 on gasoline. Next slide. We asked how many hours in a day do you use leaf blowers during the busiest times of the year when trees are shedding their leaves. Most businesses use them about 3 to 8 hours a day. We asked how are you managing the leaves? Overwhelmingly, they collect and leave them on the street, curbside in a pile. Some do mulch leaves with a mower. Some collect them in paper bags and leave them on the street. Some put them in a compost pile on the person's property. Some do a combination. Next. We also asked, are you using battery-powered equipment right now, or have you considered transitioning to them? So 20% of those 21 currently use battery-powered equipment, and 40% have considered switching. Next. So we also asked, how would switching impact your business? And this is a collection of some of the responses that we got. Battery-powered equipment is not as effective, efficient, or powerful as gas-powered equipment. Prices would go up as new equipment would have to be bought, plus extra batteries. Longer work hours, delays, access to electricity on the road to recharge equipment. Power difference would impact workers and residents. Running multiple crews, it would be expensive to replace all gas-powered equipment. Depends if powerful enough versus gas-powered for extended use. And depends if the cost to maintain to run is the same or lower than gas-powered equipment. Next. We also asked you if they would be willing to attend a sustainable landscaping workshop, and a large portion of them did. And we asked which language they would prefer it in. So we know that folks would like it to be in English, Spanish, and also American Sign Language. So throughout the year, as we work on this project, there are a number of levers that we are going to be trying to move. One is management and procurement policy. Residents, commercial property owners, nonprofits, schools, houses of faith, all have a lever if they are hiring and contracting with landscapers by telling them what it is they would like them to do and the changes they would like to make to the landscaping practices. Dan's going to talk a little bit about an example of a town that has used this lever through their procurement policy. There's also policy. Tammy's going to talk a bit about, the process for the town to develop and implement ordinances. Education is another important lever. As I mentioned, we're going to be coordinating some workshops for landscapers. And we'll also be doing quite a bit of residential outreach and education. And there's also the infrastructure and equipment lever. One thing that we want to consider and figure out how do we solve is how do we get over the hump of the initial upfront costs to transition to more battery-powered equipment? And are there examples from other towns for incentives and other type of rebates or buyback programs that we could try to replicate here in Princeton? Now I want to talk a little bit about the why, or the how we want to go about doing this. This is an example of a stakeholder power analysis tool from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. You think of any policy or program, there are those that are impacted by a decision, and there are those that have influence in the process. Where we want to make sure we are engaging folks is the folks that fall in this quadrant. Who falls into this quadrant that have the, who are impacted by the decision, and we want to make sure they have influence in the process. We want to make sure that those who are most impacted have the most influence. So I'm going to ask folks in the question and answer, if you could think, who are the members in our community, the stakeholders that have the least influence in policy and programs that are the most impacted by any decisions that we make about sustainable landscaping? And I'll come back to this at the end to see what folks have to suggest. So we want to make sure that we're engaging with them. So now I'm going to turn over to Dan. He's going to help answer the question, what do we mean by sustainable landscaping and what are other towns doing?
Dan, hold on 1 minute. Jenny's going to have to share since she downloaded your slides. So hopefully Jenny can hop back on here. Our apologies for the snafu.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Christine.
It's at the very bottom, in the bottom toolbar. That, no, you almost, there.
All right, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Mabe with the American Green Zone Alliance, otherwise known as Agsa. I'd like to thank Sustainable Princeton for having us here today or tonight. I'm very excited about the approach that Sustainable Princeton has really taken with addressing these issues with the landscape maintenance industry. It's inclusive and bringing in all the stakeholders, and it's exactly what Agsa's mantra is. If we can go to the next slide, please. First of all, we'd like to thank and acknowledge our national nonprofit partner, Quiet Communities. I've been working with them since 2013 to provide Agsa Green Zone certification and other educational services that help communities lower impacts from the grounds maintenance industry. Next slide, please. Okay, so Agsa, the American Green Zone Alliance, who are we? We are a leader in low impact, sustainable grounds maintenance strategies. Our mission is to prudently transition the grounds maintenance industry to quieter, more sustainable practices. And some of those applications are commercial crews who service municipalities, schools, residential, and commercial private properties. Some of the ways that we do this are listed here. Number one is our Agsa Green Zone certification program. This is property transition. This includes institutional properties and now residential. I will be getting into some of those slides in just a couple of minutes here. Number two is our service professional certification. This is working with the crews, the men and the women who get up every morning and who are using the tools to beautify our communities. And we focus on education, training, and it does act as a behavior modification model. And then other initiatives are our AFTC program certification, where we thoroughly vet and test electric tool platforms to make sure that when people are purchasing these tools and spending a lot of money up front and investing in these platforms, that they're going to be well informed. Okay, so an example of a very positive direction that we've been able to take the industry. And again, we really hope that this inspires people, it encourages people from all sides of this issue, and shows everybody and demonstrates that there is a pathway forward for everyone. Here's an example of an entire city who has been certified, Green Zone certified. It's the city of South Pasadena. And then how did we get here? So what the certification means for South Pasadena is all routine maintenance on all city properties is done with people-powered and battery electric tools for routine maintenance. Once again, there are some gas concessions for seasonal heavier workloads where electric equipment just is not workload or economically feasible. So what we did with the city of South Pasadena is we started with their crown jewel park, Garfield Park. We worked with their public works department, their vendor, who happens to be Landcare, they're a national company. And then we were able to certify this 10-acre park with roughly 5 acres of grass. Next slide, please. So off of that certification for Garfield Park, we were able to finish the entire city, and we had a very nice celebration that was attended, of course, by city council members, the mayor, the vendors, various action committee groups, and then also there was people, representatives from Congress, and we even had a senator come out to acknowledge this certification. So what we were able to achieve for the city of South Pasadena is, again, through the process, a 5-year process. It didn't take 5 years. The green zone actually is 5 years old. But once we were able to achieve the green zone, dial it in, and we had buy-in from the vendor and everybody, the city of South Pasadena basically revamped their vendor RFP, if you will. Any vendor that wants to do business in the city of South Pasadena needs to undergo Agsa training or equivalent, and they also need to adhere to the standards of the Agsa Green Zone certification, which for this particular green zone, again, is all routine maintenance needs to be done with people-powered and battery electric tools. Soon thereafter, a nearby golf course was very impressed, and they asked us to come in to see what we can do there. I'm really proud to say that we do have a golf course green zone, and we were able to help them achieve 70% reductions in their carbon from their maintenance operations and lower their noise profile 40 to 70%. This is a more recent one, a very fun project. This is a state park. This is Los Angeles State Historic Park. And as you can see, the downtown Los Angeles in the backdrop there. This is about a 30-acre park. And what is so rewarding about this project is Sacramento, who is the headquarters up in Sacramento, is the headquarters for all California state parks. They were very encouraged about this progress. And now we have 3 other state parks that are interested to conduct Agsa Green Zone certification projects, thereby getting rid of all of their gas and bringing in these low impact alternatives for routine maintenance. And this is an example of something that can be very vast. This is Westside Union School District in Antelope Valley, California. This is an entire school district who has transitioned and converted. It actually is about 132 serviceable acres of serviceable space. I want to let everybody know, especially the landscapers that are present tonight, that there is a way to do this, and there's a cost-effective way to do it. But again, I want to stress that the caveat is going to be taking care of the tools and making sure that you're able to achieve some of the ROI. But we can just certainly tell you that this is doable even on a very large scale. And this was a very fun one. This is our first auto mower green zone. The auto mowers are the little robot mowers that cut the lawn instead of riding or standing behind a lawnmower. This is in the state of Illinois, and it's actually at an HOA, a 96-unit HOA. They're using Husqvarna auto mowers, as you can see in that picture there. And by converting this property, it's about 30 serviceable acres, 8.4 tons of smog-forming emissions has been saved, nearly 30 tons of CO2, Again, we've lowered that noise 2 to 4-fold. And then, of course, the worker health improvements are dramatic along with the community. And then, of course, it helps mitigate all the fuel spillage, solid and toxic waste associated with maintaining and using small gas engines. And then to top it off with this project, what's really special about it is the mowers are being charged by solar panels. Basically, once it starts to run out of battery, these mowers know to go back to their little charging bay. And in this particular location, they're being charged by solar panels, which is very cool. All of our projects come with ELF reports. It stands for Environmental Landscape Footprint. And we do this with our nonprofit partner, Quiet Communities. And it gives baseline assessments, for, again, the criteria pollution, which is smog forming pollution, greenhouse gases, noise, fuel spillage, toxic solid waste, and even the field costs and consumption. And to Christine's point, it is true that greenhouse gases on a global level are not the biggest issue with lawn and garden operations, gas lawn and garden operations. However, the ground ozone and particulate pollution is substantial and certainly worth moving forward to improve our communities. So we didn't want the institutions to have all the funds, so we created the Agsa Residential Green Zone Initiative. We call it ARGZ, and basically we're empowering homeowners to take the lead and create their own green zones at home. Here's an example of a gentleman named Jared. He attended one of our workshops and he went home and he asked his gardener, hey, would you consider switching to electric? And his gardener just, I believe, didn't really understand the concept and didn't have the knowledge of how to go about doing it. So Jared decided, he loves his gardener, but he decided that he was going to basically do the math, take about 7 to 8 months worth of paying the gardener and invest in his own suite of tools and create his own little green zone at home. And he's decided to do the work at his house by himself now. I really like this one. This is in the Bronx. This is Joe. He has a plug-in mower that he uses for the back of his place there. And then look what he uses. He doesn't use any blowers, any weed whackers. He has clippers, and then he has those people-powered tools that we all get to speak about, but it is actually happening. People are still using them, and we're proud to present that this is still happening. Okay, more program solutions. And this is just a few slides about how we engage the landscape maintenance workforce. And this is where we really feel we're making the biggest difference. And again, I heard Christine, and I love the approach that Sustainable Princeton is taking of making everyone stakeholders. That's exactly what we do. When we engage the workforce, we actually empower them with knowledge so they can actually have a say of what goes on in their work environments. And I can just say, knock on wood, we're batting 1,000 so far. When we engage the workforce, all of the projects are 100% successful. And even though it's not always easy, there has been buy-in, and people are now starting to see the light and see that this is a different, perhaps better way of going about maintaining our landscapes and our properties. This is SunTech out of Florida. I'm actually going to be traveling to Florida to meet with a lot of their crews. This is actually a franchise model. You can see at the top of their van, they have solar panels, and all of their current and future franchisees are going to be Agsa Service Pro certified. And then we just want to demonstrate that we're really out there engaging the grounds maintenance industry. I want to take this slide to take the opportunity to let everybody know that I personally come from the grounds maintenance industry. As a very, very young child, I found myself in a situation where the man of the house was a high volume gardener. And I remember spending my summers and my weekends doing this work. So we're very engaged with this demographic, and we're out there shadowing them, training them, educating them, and then, of course, logging the proof of concept of these successes. Here's an example of this crew. They have their electric they have their gas service still, okay, but they started an e-crew. And I do want to mention that there are programs here in California with the air districts, and we're actually on contract with the South Coast Air Quality Management District here in Southern California to help them with outreach and tutorials and trainings and green zoning projects for this particular program. And I can tell you that these guys can trade in their gas equipment and receive, look at the one on the left. They can trade in that 2-stroke gas blower, and they can get this electric one on the right for nearly a 70% discount. So definitely, we really hope that people in other parts of the country are going to be able to find the funding mechanisms to bring down that upfront intensive capital cost and getting into some of the battery tools. Of course, in the training, we encourage them to hang their tools up. Do not throw them in the back of the truck. You can see that they're locked up to protect their investment. This particular operation has been using electric tools, their set of electric tools, for nearly 2 years now with virtually no issues. So this is a particularly good one to report. And then lastly, we're going to talk about AFTC, and that stands for Agsa Field Tested Certification. And the reason why we started AFTC is early on, when we started to expand our green zoning model, we were promised things from certain manufacturers where, you know, it's going to last this long, the batteries are going to last this long, it's going to have this performance, this runtime, and it's paramount in safety. And we really found out the hard way that that was not the case. So here are some of the brands that are AFTC certified. We want to be very clear that we are brand neutral, however, and people could use whatever they want. We just want to let people know that these are the manufacturers that have went through the very stringent process of where we test these tools beyond their recommended thresholds to make sure by the time they get into the hands of these operators that they're going to actually be up to doing commercial level work. And we really pride ourselves on evidence-based reliability. We do this firsthand ourselves in a variety of different settings all over the country. And we also aggregate information from our vast network from around the country as well. And it doesn't just stop with, okay, do the tools last a long time? Are they durable? Are they rugged? Do they perform well? You know, are they safe? It really has to be vetted on a level where we have to understand who are the distributors, who are their dealers, and is there going to be an adequate aftermarket support level for the industry that is going to be transitioning over, and we're asking to transition. Agsa works very hard and does our due diligence to vet this up front. And that's the slideshow for tonight. And again, I hope I went at the proper pace, and I want to thank everybody for being listening to the presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and look forward to having you participate in the Q&A. Now I'm going to hand it over to Maria Wega. She'll introduce herself, but she's going to share some of the responses she got in sort of more one-on-one conversations with some landscapers doing business in Princeton. We can hear you, Maria. Go ahead.
Okay. I cannot start my video, I guess. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Juega. I'm a long-term resident of Princeton, and I have been active in the Latino immigrant community in our area. I was the former executive director of the Latin American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and therefore I'm very familiar as an outsider with the landscaping industry, since it employs many members of the community. As you probably know, many of our small landscaping businesses are owned by Latinos, and so are the workers. So I was tasked with determining what the market looks like from their perspective. Next slide, please. The market, as you all know, the market has two sides. This is supply side and demand side. The supply side of the Princeton residential market for landscaping services is very fragmented. There are many, many small businesses providing the services, with some mid-size companies, but mostly are small mom and pop businesses. And the industry is very undifferentiated at this point, meaning it's very much price driven. And whoever can offer the lowest price is pretty much who gets the business. There is, however, next slide, a trend on the demand side to more differentiated services. Many of those who are here tonight probably are part of this trend towards more sustainable practices, and that is creating some clear differentiation in the on the demand side. But otherwise, the market is also very competitive and very fragmented, with many individual residential owners contracting separately for services. However, this is also changing, and we're probably going to be seeing, based on housing trends, that the Princeton market is going to be gradually switching from single-family homes to more townhouse developments and multifamily housing. That will change the dynamics of the market somewhat. But it is a very competitive, price-driven market on both sides at this point. Next slide. So given the mechanics of how a market works, we're going to likely see that even though we may see a secondary market emerge with more demand for more sustainable practices, including machines that make less noise. That means probably electric run machinery as opposed to gas driven machinery, and also demand for manual raking, perhaps, and other practices that will clearly entail higher costs on the part of the landscaper. From the landscaper perspective, the labor costs of raking, manual raking versus using blowers, it's probably a factor of 2 to 3 times. The same can be said for some of the machinery. The electrical blowers have less less output, are not as powerful, and therefore the labor component of operating these machines, it's higher. However, as demand for these types of services increases, it's very likely that the technology will quickly catch up, and as volume increases, the cost will come down. But initially, the impact on these businesses will clearly entail much higher costs. Their margins are razor thin, and it is unlikely that they will be able to provide this differentiated services unless there is a commensurate increase in the prices that they need to charge. The consumer therefore needs to understand the this mechanics and be ready to be asked to pay a higher price to cover the higher cost of the landscaper. The other dynamic that I think we need to be conscious of is the fact that the larger companies, the larger landscaping companies, will be able to make this transition much easier than the small business owner. The larger companies will have more access to credit, will have better economies of scale, and also more pricing power. They tend to be the ones doing the larger jobs, the ones serving the institutional consumer, and may have therefore more pricing power, and they will, all other things being equal, and unless something is done, will probably this will probably lead to a consolidation, meaning the smaller businesses will be put out of business. Either they will be purchased or simply will become non-competitive. Next slide. So I'm sorry that I had taken this out of the slide, but I guess this is an old version. Market externality is a technical term used in economics. These are factors that are not priced into the market, and therefore the prices that are paid do not reflect the actual cost created by these factors, i.e. The noise and air pollution. It's really something that is not accounted for in the prices that we pay as consumers. And this has become clearly more apparent in these pandemic days, in which we all remain at home and have been exposed to this more than ever. And so we now are seeing that there's a cost involved as neighbors exposed to this both noise and gas air pollution that we suffer. Also, the workers themselves are suffering the consequences and have very little power to protect themselves against the negative impact of working with this kind of machinery. There are other environmental factors involved. We know there's excessive fertilization of lawns and other practices that are not very sustainable. There are clearly legislative initiatives that could lessen these impacts and bring some of these costs into the equation, so that the true cost is paid by the consumer, or the market is forced to account or reduce these costs in some other way. And this is basically what the Sustainable Princeton initiative is going to try to attempt through the various initiatives that have been discussed and will be discussed in greater detail as we bring this to you. That's basically what I wanted to transmit. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Maria. I just want to take a little moment here to apologize for some of the translation technical issues. We understand that folks who may be trying to listen in Spanish might be having trouble, but I just wanted to apologize for that. Move on to Tammy. Tammy, I'm going to allow you to share your screen. Great. You're all set.
So good evening. I want to thank Sustainable Princeton for the invitation to present the policy aspect of tonight's presentation. So my name is Tammy Sands, and I'm the newly appointed chair of the Princeton Environmental Commission, or PEC, as we like to refer to it as. I have a background in trauma and surgical critical care medicine, as well as a degree in environmental law and policy from Vermont Law School. My thesis work was done on modern day agricultural slavery. So you can assume or be accurate in your assumption that I have a keen interest in social and environmental justice. You can advance the slide, please. So I wanted to introduce the Princeton Environmental Commission. So the commission is established based on a state statute as well as Princeton's ordinance. The composition, we are 7 members with 2 alternate volunteer Princeton residents, you could say, who advise the mayor, township administration, the town council, and local officials regarding environmental issues and actions that may affect the natural resources and inhabitants of our community. So I wanted to share a little bit of the ongoing efforts that the PEC has done. So a little bit of the history here is that almost 7 years ago, PEC recognized that sustainable landscaping practices were imperative to our community and our environment. And so I want to give them credit for that. So this has been an ongoing thing. In the presentation, you can see that there was there's a photo of Princeton's Guide to Fall Leaf Management, and that there's a link in the presentation. I'm assuming it's going to be up and accessible, but that link is a brochure that was created to guide residents in such practices. And when we're thinking about sustainable landscaping, of course, it's not just leaf, but with tonight's presentation, we're focusing on leaf management. And so just to say that sustainable leaf management alone enriches our soils, it benefits our plants, prevents water pollution, it maintains clean air, it reduces fossil fuel usage, as well as the noise. And I say noise because I think that is the form of pollution that gets forgotten about a lot, that it truly is, a form of pollution. The other thing is that other supportive sustainable practices can be found on the PEC's webpage. So on the webpage, we have resources and links that are valuable today. It's including planting native species, using integrative pest management rather than our harsh polluting chemicals, as well as considering green infrastructure on properties. You can advance. So on to PEC's annual goal setting. So the commission establishes and we adopt annual goals. We like to think that our goals are extremely ambitious, but achievable. They typically relate to the climate action plan because of the overarching and sustainability. Our goals are then go through to council, and those are outlined. So what we're doing is we're usually working at the end of the year to establish our goals, and then in the new year, that following year, they're adopted by council, and they're actually part of all the goals, you could say. And I would like to give a shout out and recognize our council liaison for PEC. So Eve Niedergang is our council liaison, and Eve serves a great role for us in order for us to formulate our goals and get them out there. In addition to our goal setting, it's also formulated, you could say other goals are formulated in relation to public raised environmental concerns. So and that was exactly what was, recently happened, where we had a large amount of the public come to us about their concerns with gas leaf blowers. We also formulate goals in the relation to the town's needs, guidelines, or legal requirements as well. Next slide, please. So PEC's related 2021 goal is to address sustainable landscaping practices. And this is aligned with Princeton's climate action plan. As Christine mentioned earlier, it's in relation to goals 6.4 and 6.5, specifically in the aspect of reducing emissions from the public and the private lawn maintenance equipment. And although the goal directly relates to what we are discussing this evening, PEC also has supporting goals that may have an impact on sustainable landscaping practices as well. So one of the other goals, you could say, actually was a carryover to finish up for this year, and that is in relation to evaluating our open spaces. And that's related to CAP goal 6.1. We also partner and support Friends of Princeton's Open Space for their wetland and riparian zone restoration, as well as in conjunction this year with the master plan update, we'll be updating the environmental inventory survey. So on to the ordinance process. So this process, it's developed in commission, and right now it's, you can say, in coordination. So we're in coordination with Sustainable Princeton and Quiet Princeton. And I have to say that a partnership like that, and I've heard it, several times tonight, this evening, during the presentation, partnership is so key, as well as communicating with our stakeholders. And I actually think that in the past, this has been PEC's most valuable lesson when trying to get ordinances passed and developing ordinances. It's the vital part of the process in successful adoption and adherence. You can also say that the communication with stakeholders is an educational process, right? So we're hearing from everyone. Everyone can see everyone's perspectives, and we can really hear, not just listen, but hear the perspectives everybody's coming with, and trying to work together to develop an ordinance that meets everyone's needs. And an example of that could easily be including the large commercial or even the small commercial and the residential landscapers at once, hearing those views to give us an indication if we need separate ordinances or if we can actually take care of everything in one ordinance. So that's just a little bit of an example of that. The other part is that supportive documentation and solid options are also a key component. And I do want to thank Quiet Princeton, because I know that they've already provided PEC with some really good solid examples. Other towns' ordinances, supporting materials such as research and scientific data about the different effects. All these are part of the process, right? Gathering information, gathering data. It allows us to take that information and perfect what is going to work best for Princeton. The other thing is with the ordinances that have already been passed in some of the towns in New Jersey, it allows us to contact or communicate with those individuals who have gone through that process already, or those potentially that are enforcing the process. So we get their lessons learned. For instance, when a town ventures down this path, maybe they didn't consider all the voices, right, in the ordinance process, or maybe something that they thought was going to work really well, even if the voices were heard, didn't work so well. So it really allows us to kind of pick and choose in what's going to work best. And again, it goes back to that stakeholder communication, you could say. Then the next step would be to have this policy reviewed by the municipal attorneys and relevant staff. The collaboration continues even at this point, this stage, I could say, to ensure that the legal language is adequately addresses what we've set out to achieve. So really also getting, the other side, the legal support to understand what we are actually trying to achieve and to make that language understandable to all parties that are going to have to reference it. You can say this part of the process, then we hope at this point the ordinance is absolutely crisp. It's been hashed out. It's concluded. It's supported by all stakeholders involved. And that's when we would be introducing this to the mayor and the council. Once we introduce the ordinance or the policy, you could say, to council, it's at least 10 days later, there's a public hearing. And typically, Princeton will hear community members, hear the public at both meetings, but actually the second meeting is really the one that's designed for more of the public comment. The other thing to note is that the original motion is, if it's amended, it can take considerable time or can create delay. So that's another reason why the front end of this ordinance process is so heavy, you could say, really getting all that involvement, really having the knowledge, having the backup, so that we can come to this clean and that we don't delay the process once the ordinance is introduced. And with this, I'd like to extend my gratitude to you, our community, for continuing to raise your concerns related to Princeton's current landscaping practices. And I'd like to end with a quote by Chief Seattle. I recently had the honor and the privilege to advocate for an indigenous community in Minnesota. And I saw firsthand what can happen with the breakdown of community and the environment that occurs when we don't consider the interconnectedness of all involved threads. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And now we're going to hand it over to Tony Lunn of Quiet Princeton. I do recognize the time. We're at 8:10, and we're going to keep going and make sure we have time for questions at the end. So Tony, you don't have to cut yours short, please. And please remember to speak slowly for the translator, and you can take it from here.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Sustainable Princeton for having this show. And it's a really wonderful group of people that you've gotten together here. And thank you to the attendees for hanging on this long. We appreciate that very much. And I'm hoping that you will hear some things in this final presentation by me which will stimulate your thinking, to show that there are new ways to do things, to deal with the challenges that the other speakers have so ably discussed. Next slide, please. My wife, Phyllis Teitelbaum, and I, and some other concerned residents founded Quiet Princeton a few years ago. Next slide. We came to Princeton 42 years ago, and in part because it's such a very beautiful town, as we all know and are very proud of. And I would like to say that this evening's show is another reason to be proud of living in this town. Princeton is doing an amazing job in dealing with this challenging issue. However, during these 42 years, or even before, this device, next slide please, was invented and developed. I took this photograph a stone's throw from my front garden. This is what it has been coming to, and this is obviously not a way to run a beautiful town. But there are other ways that we can deal with these issues. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk a little bit about paradigm shifts. By the way, I don't seem to have a video on, and it won't let me start my video. Would it be nice if you were able to show my picture on the screen, Jenny?
Just give us a moment, Tony. We'll take care of
that. So I'm going to illustrate some. Now I can do it. Great. Thank you. Paradigm shifts. Next slide. In the 19th century, people were doing things in public that became disturbing. Spitting, public urination. Ultimately, these things were stopped, and of course now they are so unacceptable that it's almost rude to mention the words that describe them. It's completely accepted that these are not things that we do, but a change was necessary. Next slide. In the 20th century, we addressed some more issues, and the one on the left is particularly interesting. With relevance to the issues that we're facing today. When there was talk about controlling smoking, for example, in restaurants, some people were very concerned. Well, there are low-paid, hard-working people in the restaurants, and if we prohibit smoking, people won't come anymore, and these waiters and staff will lose their jobs and the restaurants will go out of business. In fact, this did not happen, and indeed there was some increase in business because people like me went to restaurants more often because they were more attractive. And the other thing that's relevant to our issue today is that the people in the restaurants, that is the workers there, were exposed to this serious pollution all the time they were working there, and they were the ones who benefited most from the elimination of smoking. Pooper Scooper laws are just an example of how people at first thought, we can't possibly do this, it's a natural function of an animal. Furthermore, how can I in my elegant clothing, how can I possibly actually pick up the results of this exercise? Well, amazingly enough, people have managed to figure out how to do this. Change is possible. Next slide. And now in the 21st century, we're looking at another issue, which perhaps to some seems like it's too difficult to do anything about. How can we change our practices? But I'm going to show you, as some of the others already have, that change is indeed possible. Next slide. One of the things that leaf blowers have enabled is landscaping like this. We have lawns that have no leaves on them whatsoever, and we have mulch with no leaves on whatsoever. And I, perhaps unkindly, am calling this plastic landscaping. The lawn might as well be made of astroturf, and the bushes could have been made in a factory, and the mulch just as well could have been made out of brown-colored styrofoam. There are no birds, there are no bees, there are no butterflies, there's no life in this. And the other thing about this is that in a short period of time, leaves and other debris will fall, and you'll have to start the process of cleaning it all over again. Next slide, as illustrated here. Next slide. There are other ways of doing it. We can't all do this, but this lovely garden is just across the street from my own house. Not only is it beautiful, but most of these are perennials, so don't require a tremendous amount of planting. Not really much need for a blower in that. Next slide. Perhaps a little bit difficult to do in our town, but not out of the question. And in fact, here in this, no lawn at all. No need for a blower of any kind there. So in the longer term, we can think more grandly about how we can change the way we sculpt our properties to reduce the need for these intensive practices. Next slide. But what about right now? We have lawns, we have things that need to be done. If you are one of the people who use a landscaper, or if you are a landscaper, let me just speak a moment about the issue of talking to the landscaper about making changes in the way things are done. We've had quite a lot of experience with people, members of Quiet Princeton, or people who have talked to us about this. It's not as simple as you might think to have this discussion. Next slide. The landscaper is thinking about his or her client and thinking, well, my client wants perfect landscaping, wants me to do a really good job, and I want to be able to show that I can do a really fine job. And he has in mind something like this, and understandably thinks, well, I can't really do that without a very, very powerful, extremely noisy leaf blower and get that kind of result. Meanwhile, next slide please, the homeowner has been developing a friendly relationship with this landscaper often for many years, and there's a personal element of these interactions, and the homeowner doesn't want to offend the landscaper, has a great respect for the landscaper. But and I'm not making this up, we find this from the people who've talked to us, that some homeowners feel that they cannot tell the landscaper what it is that they want done in their property. They feel the landscaper has a way of doing it, he comes and he does it and then he goes away again. It's as if he were a surgeon. You wouldn't dream of telling your surgeon how to give you a hernia repair, for example. So think about that interaction and think about how that interaction could be done differently. Obviously, both sides need to understand each other rather better than often is the case. Next slide. This relates to those of you in the audience, and I think that's a majority, who actually do your own landscaping. And also it relates to the landscapers in the audience, and we're really pleased to have the landscapers as a part of the audience here. Right now, or more exactly in a few months when the season starts again, you can stop using leaf blowers altogether. You can leave the grass clippings in the lawn. It is good for the lawn. They will fairly rapidly decompose. You can mulch the leaves with a mower. I'm going to show you some pictures to show how effective and easy that can be. And rather than using an electric blower 100% of the time that you would have used a gasoline one, you can rake and broom selected areas, say the front walkway or the entrance to the house. We don't want a one-for-one substitution, 1 hour of electric leaf blowing instead of 1 hour of gasoline leaf blowing. We're rather encouraging a change in thinking about how this should be done. Finally, on this, and we did this, we gave our landscaper, and I'm pleased very much to see, Elder, you are here this evening. Thank you very much for being here. Very fine landscaper we have. We primed the pump. We gave him $200, and he bought simple electrical equipment. I believe he bought a hedge trimmer at first, just to get the hang of the electric stuff. And then in no time at all, he bought an electric weed whacker and an electric blower. And then we were quite thrilled when, again, on his own initiative, based on his experience with this, he showed up one day with an electric lawnmower. So he has gone, at least with us, I'm not sure about with his other clients, completely electric, bit by bit, as he learns how it all works. Next slide, please. I promised to say a little bit about mulching. This is our front garden. This is what happens at certain stages of the fall when the lovely colored leaves come down. This is before mowing. Fix this in your mind. Leaves all over the place in the 3 patches of grass. Now the lawnmower came, and this is the result. There was no blowing at all to switch from the first picture to this one. The leaves have been mulched in by the mower. You can see little bits of chopped up leaves on the grass, but most of them are too small to see. And as it rains over time, they will be absorbed into the grass. And a few of the leaves got blown sideways into that flower bed in the center left, where they serve as mulch. So that meanwhile, recently a traditional landscaper who operates a couple of doors away from us with very, very powerful and very, very noisy leaf blowing equipment treated this exact situation rather differently. They spent a very long time removing every leaf from the grass and every leaf from every shrub and collecting it in a pile going round and round. And when they had done that, they then mowed the grass. So that little vignette is an example of how you can actually change your practices, and it takes less time, not more time. Next slide, please. If you do find that your landscaper has limited interest in doing things in a different way, we have a page on our quietprinceton.org website called Quiet Landscapers, where you can explore other possibilities. Next slide, please. Why should we do this? Well, I remind you about the waiters in the restaurants when we had smoking. It's a very analogous situation, except it's not just pollution, it is also noise pollution as well as particulate pollution. The landscapers' workers will be the first to get the benefit. And it's been the experience in 200 towns and cities around the country that it won't cost 3 times as much. I gave you an example with that mulching. Also, one can change the practices. You might grow to decide that it actually looks nicer than the plastic landscaping look. The birds, the bees, the neighbors, and the planet will thank you. It can be done. Next slide. As we used to say in the 1960s, this is a fine opportunity to think globally about the planet and act locally in your own front and backyard. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tony. Okay. I can have my colleagues have all of our, get ready to have everyone's video on. But before we go into the Q&A, I just want to point some folks to some more resources in addition to Quiet Princeton's great resources of how you can talk to your landscapers. There were also some questions in the Q&A that touched on a few different other related topics. You know, if you think holistically about how we're managing our properties, there are other things we could be doing with them, like installing rain gardens, like installing meadows, leaving the leaves. And there are a number of resources that we have up here on the slide that we want to encourage folks to check out that I think will be very helpful. And I just want to remind folks again, you know, as we're talking about this as a community, you know, how do we make sure that the folks who are the most impacted by the decision are moved to that second quadrant to make sure they have influence in the process? Just make sure we're always thinking about that as we go throughout any of our efforts. Okay, let's get to our Q&A. All right, and if our speakers can unmute themselves. Great. So we had a couple of questions that came in ahead of the event that are also related to a number of the questions that were in the Q&A in the webinar tonight that have to do with costs. And the results of our survey and from the results of Maria's talking to landscapers, there are some concerns about or questions about does changing or requiring a change in how folks use landscaping equipment impose some costs onto the landscapers. And Dan, you talked about some of the initial upfront costs for transitioning equipment, but also questions came up about, well, if you're going to require folks to rake, it will cost more. And I wanted to know if we could address some of those sort of varying bits of information about what does this mean to the bottom line of the landscaping community if we're going to be trying to transition to more sustainable practices? How do we ensure that no one loses jobs or loses income?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. What we find is battery electric, if that's going to be the alternative, is definitely going to, at least upfront, it's going to be an intensive capital cost upfront. That being said, we have a lot of models that demonstrate if the workers are able to take care of the tools and their battery bank over time, they will see a return on their investment. But I would like to point out something that Tony had mentioned in his presentation, and we're really trying to message this as well, is a lot of the landscapers, landscape maintenance fleets out there and workforce, what they're saying to us is, okay, you want us to go electric, well then replace my gas work production capability with electric. And in some cases, we can do that specific to tool and then specific to that workload. But in general, I really feel that we all need to pitch in, including homeowners, to not have this expectation that is putting such pressure on the industry to be so perfect to get a paycheck. With that being said, though, I will say that hedge trimmers and line trimmers, we have tested time and time again against the top gas models in controlled settings. They can be apples for apples in work production rates, the electric can with their gas counterparts. Of course, the blower is not there, and we're saying it doesn't even need to be there. Because when even you're transitioning to electric blowers, we're preaching to them, use a combination of raking with the electric to replace that gas workload. So, you know, you can't get around that capital cost up front. Again, in California, we do have programs where they trade in their gas and they're able to get these things at a much lower price. But if you don't have that, then you're going to really want to make sure that the workers are going to take care of their tools long enough to receive that ROI and that benefit.
Question, thank you, Jen. A question that came up in the Q&A was, are there other services such as flower and vegetable garden maintenance, rain garden construction that could expand the services offered by landscaping companies to, you know, to help them have other ways for them to earn income? Are you familiar with any examples like that, either Dan or Tony?
I'll go first, Tony, really quick. Absolutely, it's emerging, and it's emerging based on our demand, the community's demands, as we're becoming more enlightened, and we have a different expectation, which isn't the plastic gardening. It's more of a pollinator type garden, and then yes, even growing food. I think that this workforce has to be first of all informed of these opportunities, and then there needs to be a mechanism and resources for them to be trained to have these skill sets.
And
I don't have much to offer to that yet, but just to say that I think that actually there will be work to go around, and the loss of positions is not going to be as much as people are concerned about. Some things will happen, perhaps, for example, mulching that I described, which will actually make the work go a little faster, but that means that there's a quicker turnaround time for the leaf operator, for the mowing machine operators, and they will be able to get and other clients may actually be more demanding and want more attention made with a rake or with an electric blower, which isn't as powerful and may take a little longer and will have to charge more. And you know, Maria was making some very good points about the economics of this whole thing. Perhaps we can eventually differentiate and break out from the idea that this has to be the lowest possible cost. This town has people who don't have much money, and this town has people who have a lot of money, and some of the people can readily afford to pay more without too much trouble, whereas others cannot, and so there can be an adjustment.
And if I can just add one more little thing to that equation there. Again, once you go electric, you invest in your battery bank and you have your fleet, the cost per kilowatt hour to charge those batteries to achieve those workloads versus two-stroke oil and gas and then the maintenance, it's substantially lower. And they're going to have that benefit. I was on the phone with a gardener tonight. He's Agsa Service Pro certified. They do about 60 homes per week. and we are doing a study from his operation specifically. And when we're ready to publish, I'll send it to everybody. But he was telling me 8 months into this, he is saving a substantial amount of money on fuel. And a lot of these operations really don't understand their costs. When I first spoke to this gentleman, I said, okay, so what's your monthly fuel expenditure? How often and how much do you pay to get the tools repaired and maintained? And no one can really give me a straight answer right out of the gate. So there's definitely that benefit to electric, is that cost savings.
Great. The question is about, I think, the education versus policy. And the question is, there's danger that attempts to change landscape behavior through education will cost time and money with little change in behavior. And I think I'll start and then maybe hand it over to you, Tammy. I see they're mutually reinforcing. When you have education alongside good policy, you get both. Part of having a policy that's good, that is effective, it requires good education to go alongside of it. So I don't see it as an either or. I see them as and alsos. You have to do both and do both well. Tammy?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Christine. And I think that's why during my presentation, I did mention that actually when we're going through the process and we are involving our stakeholders, and that's everyone that's involved, of course, in the process, that it's not only a dialogue, it's actually hearing, right? Hearing everyone's perspective, and it allows for education to happen in that time, because we're hearing the perspectives and how we can come to this together as a unified force, you could say. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think good initial education, looking at those levers that we talked about earlier, policy, education, infrastructure, and management decisions, when we do them all really well in coordination, you get there faster, is kind of my perspective. Tony or Dan, do you want to add to that about anything to that question?
Well, go ahead, Tony, please.
It's not quite an answer to the question, but the issue of saving fuel is a very significant one. As Dan indicated, often because you're paying small amounts on a frequent basis, you don't really necessarily add up what you're paying. But was it one of the earlier presenters, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, Maria perhaps, said that there is $250,000 in our town alone spent on gasoline for these machines. Of course, a lot of that goes to the mowers. This is a staggering amount. And I'll just give you a little factoid here. This is from the EPA. This is not some crazy long-haired environmental type. It's the EPA had done their studies, and they found that the spillage of gasoline just in the process of filling up lawnmowers and leaf blowers and things, the spillage per year is as much fuel as was in the Exxon Valdez disaster.
Mm.
It is hard to get to grips with the scale of it.
Yep. Okay. We got two questions left, and because we're about 10 minutes over our end time. One is about hearing, and can homeowners and landscape owners help workers using leaf blowers avoid hearing loss, even if they don't stop using the noisy ones? This one advantage for low-income workers of cutting the noise of the equipment is not small. I don't know, Dan, if you have, or Tammy from your health background, could talk to a little bit about the hearing issues. In our survey, we did ask the landscapers, do you provide hearing protection? So we have an idea of how many are doing that. And also, Dan, the battery-powered leaf blowers aren't entirely quiet. They're not completely without noise. Can you talk a little bit about how much quieter they are and what could be done to make sure workers are using hearing protection when they need to?
Sure, I'll answer the hearing protection first. With more independent operators, even culturally to this day, some of them are just like, oh, I don't need it. And if they're wearing it, they're looked at as like, oh, that guy's wearing hearing protection. What a wimp or whatever. But, we definitely encourage it. But yes, when they're not working for a private licensed company who requires it, then yes, that it's going to be very difficult. With electric, we definitely insist and in our certification, tell them that they need to still wear hearing protection. Now, not all electric blowers on the market are the same. Some can have the same decibel levels, let's just say 65 dB at 50 feet per ANSI standard, but they have different harmonics, different twangs, if you will. But in general, most battery electric models on the market are going to be significantly less dB than their gas counterparts. And even if there's a gas model that has the same decibel level as an electric, that gas one has a low frequency component that allows that noise to travel longer distances and go through barriers much easier. But back to the workers, I would just say continual outreach and just even maybe homeowners could buy the little ones in the little packets there and hand them right to their gardeners even. But that's definitely an issue that has been challenging.
Yeah, and I'll just add that when Dan mentioned about not wanting to wear the equipment, protective equipment, it's just like riding a bike, right? When helmets weren't that cool, and now it's we know from the trauma world and that they protect, whether you're on a bicycle or you're on a motorcycle.
And seatbelts too, right, Tammy?
Yep, seatbelts too.
So there's a question about mulching. How do you get folks to use mulching as an option? Why can't lawn businesses mow the leaves first? And I think that gets to maybe need to ask them to do it. Tony or Dan, what do you suggest what can be done to encourage landscapers to mulch the leaves? And is there times of the year where that makes sense and doesn't? Like what would it require to sort of do that ongoing?
Perhaps the easiest way to do it is to take those two photographs that I showed, the before and after. A picture is worth a great deal. Obviously, whether that works or not in part depends on the thickness or density of the leaves. And it works best with a moderate amount of leaves. We have sometimes asked our landscaper to go over the leaves twice with the mower in order to mulch them properly. So sometimes different techniques are required. But in simple situations, it's a piece of cake. It's a matter of just learning a new idea.
And to that point, I think that, again, the education like you guys are doing needs to be all inclusive. The homeowners need to be educated as well. When we can get them to understand that when their gardener strips those leaves, at 200 miles per hour off of the topsoil and the turf, they're really ruining the biodiversity in their landscapes. And it's them, not so much lowering their aesthetic expectation, but having a different aesthetic expectation, keeping in mind how to be with one in nature and better stewards of their properties, environmentally speaking. And that is where the dialogue between the homeowner and the gardener with that specific message and education is essential.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Tony. All right, there are a couple of questions in the chat about Rutgers and do they provide any type of assistance or education, sustainable landscaping? Richard McCoy, if you have noticed, I have unmuted you and allowed you to talk. We have someone who's been in the audience who I think can answer that question. I hope he's...
Hi, Christina.
Hi, Richard.
How are you? Thanks for
Good.
unmuting me and holding my
You're
tongue.
very welcome.
Yes, Rutgers does provide specifically a program for organic and ecological land care. Since 2013, we have a 4-day certificate course that contractors, municipalities, and homeowners can take part in to learn all the different aspects of the things that you're talking about, whether it's ecological, organic, electric equipment, things of that nature. It talks everything that we look at from a holistic landscape is taught at that Rutgers program. And it's Rutgers, it'd be the Rutgers Organic Land Care Program. If anybody's looking for it, I could share the link, a link with Christine and Jenny and the folks from Sustainable Princeton if folks are interested in that. Currently, the course is not being offered because of COVID. We're working on an asynchronous course, so we have to record some videos and things of that nature. So hopefully in the next 2-3 months or so, that'll be up and available for folks to have a look at.
Thank you, Richard. For those of you who don't know Richard, Richard is a landscaper who does business in the area who is sort of on the cutting edge of transitioning to being a very sustainable landscaper, as well as an educator through the Rutgers programs.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap it up because we're at 8:45, and thank you so much to the 43 attendees who stuck with us throughout this entire event. Jenny, if you could, or Molly, if you could just bring up our last slide with some information so people can email us if they have any additional questions or have trouble getting to the recorded video. While you're doing that, I want to personally thank Tammy, Dan, Maria, Tony, Christina, who's been doing the translation, for speaking tonight. I hope that our audience learned a lot. I certainly did. And with that, we will bring our meeting to a close, our webinar to a close. And I wish everyone a safe and restful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.